you can stress up to stress down, as I call it, cold exposure, and that's going to increase your metabolism and also the neurotransmitters in your brain. I think that you will benefit from already the first time that you go. If you already have a cold, I don't recommend that people do cold exposure. The main thing for the brown fat is to increase heat. So what happens in the sauna is that we know today that it increases your heat stress proteins, which will repair the cells from the inside.
Cold and heat scientist, best-selling author of the amazing book Winter Swimming, and the founder of the Soberg Institute, offering the Thermalist cure. Our guest today on the Settle or Be Better podcast is Dr. Susanna Soberg, who's going to be talking to us about the science behind cold and heat exposure. So welcome, Dr. Susanna, and over to you. Why don't you begin by telling us a little bit about your personal health and wellness story, and how is it that it led you to this founding and this research of yours?
Hi, Sakshi. Thank you so much for inviting me on your podcast. I am so thrilled that I'm going to be talking to someone from India. So also that cold and heat exposure is also reaching that part of the world. So that's very exciting, I think. So I'm a researcher in metabolism, and I started this research almost 10 years ago. And it's about how you can lower your stress and your inflammation in the body. And I started this as kind of a journey where I wanted to see if we could find ways of lowering that without drugs, but in a natural way. So basic science in humans.
Understood. Lovely. That's a lovely story to know. And I have been reading your book personally, the Winter Swimming book, and it's amazing. And I highly recommend it to all of our listeners. I'm sure that they can find a lot of more details about it in the description below, so they can definitely learn more from there. But to begin with, what we have observed globally right now in the last 5 years, or like say 1 decade, is that cold exposure has grown very popular, right? Like everywhere, like even in India right now, in the last 2 years, you'd see so many people embracing the cold and cold exposure. And even though we don't have snow here in many parts, we do a bit with ice baths and cold showers, right? Why do you think that there is this sudden surge in the interest with cold exposure in the last 10 years, and what has sort of led us to it?
I think that's a really good question. I think that a lot of things have happened, not only COVID-19, but that definitely took what was the trend more to something that is almost now becoming mainstream. I think that people have discovered what kind of energy and mental health and physical benefits you will get from exposing yourself to the cold and heat, something that we have always known works for your body and what works for your mind. So this is not a new thing. We actually have done this for centuries. And you can say that Greek philosophers already back in the Greek times, that was Hippocrates and Plato, they talked about cold and heat exposure as something really good for your body, something that will make the body fluids better in your body, and in that way talked about something that intuitively was healthy for you. But today we can prove that with science. So we have kind of proven something that we have known for many, many, many years and done for so many years, but now we have something to back that up so we can say what happens and also why is it healthy and who should do this and for how long. So I think that something that was a trend became more mainstream because of the lockdown of COVID-19. People missed something to do. I think also with all the lockdowns of all the theaters and stuff you could do usually that entertained you. I think that people needed something to get out of that stress, get out of the worries, because that definitely spiked during COVID-19. And we still have that right now. We see that stress and anxiety and depression is still going up. And that's definitely also because of the lockdown and COVID-19. So we have this backlash from that, and we have to do something new about that. We cannot just go on as we did before, we have to figure out new ways of increasing our energy and also lowering anxiety. And depression, anxiety, stress is on the rise still. So what cold and heat can do is lowering that stress by actually exposing yourself to this kind of like extreme stress factor, which it is. You can stress up to stress down, as I call it. It's almost become my motto. So stress up to stress down is a way of widening your window for how much stress you can take. And I think that people have discovered that this is a way of stress relief, even though it seems very stressful in the moment you do it.
Absolutely, that's very true, and I feel like that's the very right reason that people have started embracing the cold. But a lot of us now are becoming aware of cold exposure, right? But it's only cold exposure. What you talk about and what your research is about is cold and heat together, right? So can you tell us a little bit about that? That how are we supposed to approach this, and is this the thermalist approach?
So this is the thermalist approach. So what you do is you expose yourself both to the cold. So that could be cold water. So you can dip yourself into a cold ice bath, take a cold shower, but you can also then switch to doing some kind of heat exposure. That could also be a hot bath, hot shower, as long as you alternate between the cold and the heat, because that's going to increase your physical health, lower the inflammation in the body, and also increase that window that I just talked about, widen your window for stress in your life. So you can take more stress without actually getting overwhelmed. And I think that what we so what we showed in my research is that if you alternate between the cold and the heat, doing 11 minutes of cold exposure per week, so that is immersion into cold water, and alternate that with sauna, which is 57 minutes per week, divided on 2 to 3 days. So you should not do this all together at once, but divided on 2 to 3 days, and do multiple dips in the water and going into a sauna. So sauna is what I have researched, and also cold water immersion in my winter swimmers in my PhD.
Understood. And so you're saying that this is not something that we do back to back, right? Like we don't get into the cold and then jump into the sauna, or we divide it on different days, right? That's what you're saying.
Yeah, exactly. So you do no, you can alternate on the same day, but you don't do 11 minutes cold immersion on one day, because that's probably going to overexpose your body for too much of this extreme kind of stress. So what you do is that you only go for a few minutes in the cold water, then you go to a sauna, and then back to the cold water, to the sauna, and then you end on the cold. I think that's very important, because what happens is that you expose yourself to that cold exposure, and that's going to increase your metabolism and also the neurotransmitters in your brain, which we know also increases when you go into cold water. And noradrenaline is one of the main factors here, because that's going to give you the energy and also activate a special kind of tissue in our body, which I have researched for many years now. So that is what is called the brown fat. And we already know the term of the white fat. So we all want to get rid of more white fat, because that's making us fat and obese and increase the risk of type 2 diabetes, our modern lifestyle diseases. So what we want to do is lowering white fat, but we want to have more of the brown fat. So let me just explain what's the difference in these kind of tissues. So the brown fat is the healthy kind of fat. It is rich in what is called mitochondria. Mitochondria are the energy fabrics in the cells, which can activate. And for the brown fat, that is noradrenaline, which will increase when you go into cold water. It's activated as soon as you get cold on your skin. Then a signal will be sent to the brain that you're getting cold. And the temperature regulating center will sense, oh, it's colder than it usually is. So we have to regulate the body so you don't get hypothermic. So the brain tells the body to do all sorts of things, do vasoconstriction, that is one thing, to shut off the cold, which is coming to your skin, to lower the risk of hypothermia. Also, it increases noradrenaline, a little bit adrenaline, and actually not cortisol. That is shown already that cold water immersion doesn't increase cortisol, but it activates your sympathetic nervous system in this way, what is called the cold shock, where you have this initial shock where you increase noradrenaline, and that's going to activate the brown fat. The main thing for the brown fat is to increase heat. So it's a mechanism in your body, a tissue in the body, that's going to make sure that you don't get hypothermic by creating heat from taking up glucose and fat from the bloodstream as fuel to this kind of special tissue that we have in the body. So it creates heat, so you don't get hypothermic. And it also increases your metabolism because it uses sugar and fat from the bloodstream. And in that way, the brown fat can use energy in your body, so burn calories, and the white fat stores calories. So that's the difference. They're quite opposite tissues, even though they're both fat types. But the brown fat, you can maybe compare that a little bit more with muscle tissue. It has rich mitochondria, just like the muscle tissue, but it also increases heat without actually the shivering. So the brown fat is your main rescuer, you can say, from getting hypothermic, because the muscles will be later on helping to increase that heat as soon as you start shivering in the cold. So
Understood. That was really well explained, and it sort of simplifies also the way we want to approach cold and heat exposure, because, like you said, 11 minutes is what we should do over the span of a week, right? And 57 minutes of heat exposure, sauna, right?
yeah,
So that's amazing, because what is happening right now with the craze that cold exposure is having is that people are doing like 11 minutes every day, or 3 times a week, which is a lot, right? And that's what we need to sort of understand to find the balance between this. And it's an amazing way to understand the science behind this as well. Is that what is actually happening in cold is that we are activating our body to sort of generate heat, right? And that's something that a lot of us miss out on when we understand cold exposures. It's an amazing, right? So thank you for sharing that and simplifying the science behind it, which makes a lot of sense. Also, to talk about vasodilation, correct me if I'm wrong, but from what I have read and from what I've heard is that this is what happens when we get into cold exposure, right? So what is it exactly? And if I'm not wrong, there are also medications called vasodilators, right? But if not that, how can we sort of are we doing this naturally through cold exposure, and what would it do for us in our body?
So cold exposure helps your vasoconstriction and vasodilation. So it increases nitric oxide. Nitric oxide is helping our vasodilation and constriction and makes the blood vessels more smooth. So you will have more elastic, you can say, vessels in your body. And that's going to help your blood circulations as well. And it's going to make your skin more vascular, meaning that you can say the alternation between the cold and heat is going to do that both, but especially the cold, and because you're also using your breathing to lower that stress, nitric oxide is probably one of the main mechanisms for helping you increase that heat in your body to help all your cells get more oxygen. So, and that's a really, really cool thing, because what happens if you are low on nitric oxide is that our organs, our tissue in the body is not getting enough oxygen. And cold exposure is actually also helping with that, because you use your breath to lower your stress as well. So all these things work together to increase that vasodilation and vasoconstriction, so you will get more vascular skin and tissue.
Understood. Amazing. That was really well explained. And I have two doubts over here. So one is, when you say cold exposure, we do understand that, and in India there are so many of these ice pots coming up, right? Like wherein we can immerse it with the ice water. It's portable and we can have ice in it. It's kind of accessible to do. But when you talk about sauna, that's not really that accessible to a lot of people here, right? So do hot showers play any role, or would they have any kind of a similar effect as the sauna? Like if we do cold emotions and hot showers instead of sauna?
Yeah, so I think that any kind of heat that you can expose yourself to is gonna do some kind of effect. What is mostly researched right now is sauna, and sauna is, you can say, a very Scandinavian thing, which has now spreading all over the world, which is amazing because the sauna is hot air. So you are also inhaling that hot air, which is also going to do have some effect on your uh, both on your cardiovascular system, but it's also helping you breathe more deeply. So, and that's going to increase the nitric oxide. So I think that the breathing of the hot air is definitely a component to this. We need more research on this. So what happens in the sauna is that we know today that that it increases your heat stress proteins, which will repair the cells from the inside. Whether a hot shower can do the same is a good question, which I don't know by now, but I think that maybe research in the future will show that. But what we do know is that heat stress in some way, for example, a hot bath. So if you have a tub, you can also do a hot bath of 39 to 40 degrees Celsius water. That's also going to increase your metabolism. It's definitely shown in people with type 2 diabetes that if they do this on a regular basis for some weeks, they can increase their insulin sensitivity and also have a better glucose balance. So when it comes to hot showers specifically, we don't have that data right now, but a tub can do it. So if you can do yourself a hot bath and alternate also with some kind of cold, maybe the cold shower, that's going to also give you some of these effects at least.
Understood. That gives us a lot of insight, and I'm sure it helps our Indian audience specifically to put this into perspective and to sort of measure the resources that they have here, right? So that's a great insight for us. And also, to come to your research, right? If you can tell us a little more details about it, what was the intention and what were the specific findings from your research?
Yeah, so the main thing that we wanted to do with my research is to measure brown fat in humans. And what we did was kind of like a first study that we wanted to see in humans who do cold water immersion, if we can activate the brown fat. And actually, if people who do cold water immersion on a regular basis, and here in Denmark, we call them winter swimmers, even though they don't always swim, they just do the cold water immersion. So, but we wanted to see if the cold exposure as for water would activate brown fat and if we can increase the volume of brown fat. And we compared that to a control group, which was matched on age and gender and fitness level, diet, and also on BMI. So we wanted to see if we have these two groups, if we could see any difference. So the winter swimmers that we recruited to the study were already doing winter swimming for 2 to 3 years before they entered the study, because we wanted to see if we could immediately see any difference in the two groups. And what surprised us was that if we look at just the volume of the brown fat, we didn't really see any difference between the groups, but we did see that the winter swimming group had a lower fat percentage. And they also increased their energy expenditure when they were exposed to the cold more than the control group, meaning that their metabolism was very fast. When we then exposed them to drinking a glucose drink, we could see that they had a very fast glucose metabolism. So they get rid of sugar in the bloodstream very fast. And I know in India, there's a huge actually incidence of type 2 diabetes. So we do know that this will help them also. We do see that in the winter swimmers, they also they have a lower insulin level compared to the control group, meaning that they might have a better insulin sensitivity. And you really want that because better insulin sensitivity means that you are further away from getting type 2 diabetes, and meaning that the cells sense the sugar better and can take that up and away from the bloodstream, because you don't want to have a high level in your bloodstream, because that's going to increase your risk of type 2 diabetes. So having a better insulin sensitivity is really good. But this also boils down to that our winter swimmers had more activity, you can say more efficient brown fat. We saw that the brown fat increased the heat that it exposed from the brown fat more than in the control group. Also, it was both during the cold, but also at room temperature. So we measured that in the laboratory where they slept there for a couple of days. We could see they had a higher brown fat activity just on a basic level, resting basic level. So meaning that they were probably just, they were also losing heat more. So that's one of the outcomes that comes from getting cold adapted, is that you lose heat more because you have more vascular skin. And that means that you evaporate just more heat. And to compensate from that, the body needs to create heat. And a way to do that is to activate your brown fat. And that's going to take glucose and fat from the bloodstream. In that way, you are increasing your metabolism, not only when you do the cold exposure, but also in the hours where you're not. So yeah.
Right. That's a great insight, because what we didn't know is it okay to sort of feel cold after a cold shower, after an ice bath? Is it okay? Is it normal? And we did know that we are doing this sort of for a reason to get in more touch with hormetic stress, and also to relieve anxiety in long run. But to talk about metabolism, that's something that we haven't explored a lot, I feel, currently, and your research is doing a great deal with that, because when we talk about metabolism, it's usually just nutrition and exercise science, right? Like, it's very rarely that cold exposure also gets talked about in that. So this makes a lot of sense, and I'm sure that explains how you feel after a cold shower and ice bath, and what it is actually doing in your biology. So that's a great insight for us. Thank you for sharing that with us. And talking about two things over here. So one is injuries. I'm not sure if it's a valid question or not, but if somebody has an injury or an ache and pain in their body, how does the cold and heat exposure sort of work over here? Because usually for most pains, we are used to applying heat because it feels more comforting, wherein actually we should be applying cold, which would actually, like, sort of, I feel like, lower the inflammation and the pain or the swelling, right? So how should we go about this? Like, I'm not sure if it's a valid question again, but like, how can we approach injuries with cold and heat setting?
Yeah, so I think it's a really good question. So thank you for that. I think that what is important here is to look at both cold and heat as extreme kind of exposures that of temperature, which the body will react to. But cold to, you can say, take the acute pain away, to lower that inflammation, the acute inflammation in that tissue, in the joint, or whatever is hurting your back, is a very scientific based way also of lowering the acute inflammation. So we already have a lot of science showing how ice packs can lower the, you can say, second grade inflammation after an injury. So we already know that works very well. So if you fall and you break something, or then you will put something cold on it, because that's going to stop the inflammation. So we already know that. But actually, heat can also cure or take away acute pain. So it's been shown in studies where researchers have submerged subjects into hot baths and shown that that's also taking the acute inflammation and the pain away. So it's really important to not say that one is not working and the other. It's not that dichotomy. It's not that black and white. So you can say that if you have access to a hot bath, then you can do that for pain. But if you can do a cold immersion of that joint or whatever that is hurting you, if you have chronic pain, then cold immersion is really, really efficient, because it increases the the metabolism, but it increases your immune system. So when you go into cold water or you go into a hot bath, then you will lower the inflammation in that joint, in that place where you have your chronic pain or your acute pain. But if you do it repeatedly, then you will have an activation of your immune system, and you will have in the beginning an increase of neurotransmitters in the brain, dopamine, serotonin. You will have noradrenaline, and you will in that way have the activation of your immune system and your sympathetic nervous system. It's going to lower your inflammation, and in the inflammation in that specific joint is also going to be affected. If you are new to this, then you have an increase in leukocytes and monocytes, which is part of your immune system. So what we think might happen is that when you increase that and you lower the inflammation in time, you will have you could say a cleanup of all that inflammation in that joint, and also that's going to help the pain go away.
Understood. That's some great insight, because there's always this confusion with heat and cold exposure in terms of injuries, and we sort of at times end up making the wrong decision or the wrong application when we are injured, right? So this really sort of simplifies this for our audience. Thank you for sharing that. And you also talk about treating illnesses with cold and heat, right? So can you share a little bit more about that? That what particular illnesses are we talking about, and how is it that cold and heat can sort of help us with it?
Yeah, so we still need a lot of research to like specifically go into what kind of diseases can this actually cure. Right now, we are talking more about how this can prevent diseases. It might be that when we get further in the research, we can say that it can maybe even cure depression, maybe it can cure anxiety, maybe it can cure type 2 diabetes, but for that we would need some more research. But what it has is potential. It has a lot of potential, because what we see when you submerge yourself into cold water is that it decreases the inflammation, and also decreases the inflammation and increases the metabolism, and insulin sensitivity is getting better. So that is a very strong, you could say, outcome or a predictor for lifestyle diseases such as type 2 diabetes. So what we found in my study was that insulin sensitivity was better, and a faster glucose metabolism, which is a very strong indicator of that they have a better metabolism because they use cold and heat exposure. But we do see in research that if you use hot bath, for example, and in subjects with type 2 diabetes and obesity, that they also increase the insulin sensitivity and their HB1AC, which is, you can say, a measure for their glucose metabolism over a period of time. And that is a strong measure, which indicates that if you can lower that, then you are your diabetes is getting better, at least. I haven't seen a study that has cured it yet, but it seems that the activation, the hormetic stress, is exercise for your cells, for your cardiovascular system, and that is the number one. You can say cardiovascular diseases are number one killer in the world. So if we can decrease the risk factors, the root causes of this, then I think that we have, you can say, a multiple way of lowering all the modern lifestyle diseases that we see today, such as type 2 diabetes, obesity in general, but also neurological diseases, Alzheimer's, depression, and anxiety, stress in general. So we have these bigger, you can say, risk factors, which we know is the root cause of all these lifestyle diseases. So if we can lower that, and in the same way, it's non-invasive, right? You don't expose yourself to any pills here. This is just prevention. So incorporating this into your life, just as exercise, we have already accepted exercise as a way of staying healthy. And I think, and I predict, that this is also something that we will use and accept in the years to come. It's just like jogging, for example. I think this is so funny, because if you go back in time and see how and why jogging, running was such a is such a big deal today, why we have accepted this. But back in the days when this was discovered in, I think it was around the 50s or 60s, I remember seeing these movies, clips in school, where they were jogging, people were jogging in California, and the speaker said, "Oh, they started jogging in California. This is such a new trend. Is it? Do you like it, or don't you like it? Maybe it's just something that will pass tomorrow." But it kind of didn't. Exercise is today so accepted as a way of staying healthy and growing muscles to increase that insulin sensitivity that will keep us from having these lifestyle diseases. So I think this is definitely something in the years to come will increase as also when more research is coming out. So it's just a way of talking about it also, how much and how should we do it in order for it to stay in the hormetic stress, meaning the healthy stress, and not overdo it so it becomes too much and almost chronic for the body, which will then exhaust the cells, and that's going to have some bad effects for the body. So we still need more research, of course, on this, but I think that we have enough today that we can say it is going to decrease your inflammation, it is going to increase your metabolism and your neurotransmitters in the brain. So this is also something that would definitely help for mental health, and I see a lot of good things coming out of this.
Absolutely, and I mean we are already seeing an increase with the acceptance of cold and heat exposure in the last 5 years, like we discussed earlier, right? So I'm sure that this is just going to increase much more globally, and that's really good news for everyone. And I have two things over here. So one is immunity, and the second is safety around cold exposure, right? So talking about immunity, we hear all these leading people in the cold exposure sector, right? And we see them talk about how they haven't fallen sick for the last few years, ever since they started doing cold exposure, in terms of any viral infections or, like, say, cold and cough and fever, just these things that we tend to sort of deal with in every other month, right? Some people.
Yeah.
So what's the research around this right now, but does it also have any effect on that? Like, can we use it as a preventive care in order to sort of boost our immunity and not fall sick that often?
I think that's a really good question, and I definitely think that we need also more research on that when it comes to cold water immersions. But when I think the study that I think is we can talk about is the study from Holland, from the Netherlands, where they have done cold showers. Cold showers are accessible to most people, and what they found in this study was that if you do, it's a randomized controlled trial where they had people ending on a hot shower for 30 days and actually up to 90 days, and the other group ended on 30 seconds of cold shower. So they all took a hot shower firstly, but one group ended on a cold shower. What they found in this study was that if you do that for 30 seconds up to 90 seconds, there was no difference. So if you can come up to 30 seconds, that's enough. But what they saw was that they had fewer sick days from work. It could be that they have a better immune system and it boosted their immune system, which also made them feel less sick. But what I think might have happened in that study, or what happens when people feel less sick, is also their positive mind around how they feel, right? So if you wake up in the morning and you feel sick, then you don't go to work. But if you do cold exposure, you will have an increase in noradrenaline and dopamine, serotonin, and that's also going to increase your mood, your mental balance, and your energy, which is definitely maybe the most profound outcome of this. So if you increase your energy and you just in general feel more energetic, you will maybe feel less sick when you are just a little bit sick. So it could be that that also has an effect. But I think that no matter what, that is a good outcome, because maybe that's going to take your whatever away that you feel that morning and you didn't go to work. So it's definitely something that we know has an effect on how you feel. But on the immune system, I think we need more research on that, if it can actually take away a cold, for example. If you already have a cold, I don't recommend that people do cold exposure. Yeah, because we should think about extreme temperatures also as a stress factor. Just like when you are sick, you wouldn't go and exercise because you do know that that's not going to help you get better, because it takes away the focus from the immune system on something else. And that is the same with the cold exposure. So if you feel sick, then stay home. And you would wait until you feel better. So there's this threshold. So if you are way too stressed, for example, in your life, then maybe doing cold water immersion to de-stress is not the right time. So you should find that window where you are not overly stressed and maybe even can't sleep or something like that. So you should find that window, and then it will help you even better to get that better sleep and to get healthier.
Understood. That was really well explained. And the second point I had over here was safety around cold exposure, right? So you did mention that we still need a lot more research in understanding what diseases it can cure and not, right? But we can, as a preventive care, start doing it. But do you think that there's still some population who should not be advised to go for cold emotions? And if yes, then who are they? Like, in what conditions should we, like, you already mentioned of being sick and being under a lot of stress. That is one thing. But people with what types of conditions shouldn't really sort of at this moment in time go for ice emotions?
Yeah, that is a very important question. And I think that as many other things, these things are not for all people. So I always recommend that if you have heart diseases or unregulated high blood pressure, maybe this is not for you. So doing cold water immersion is very stressful for your nervous system. So what happens is that you activate your sympathetic nervous system, the cold shock, and that's going to increase your heart rate. But you also activate your diving response, which is decreasing your heart rate. So that's kind of a bit of a stressor for the heart. That is why you should be healthy. So if you have unregulated high blood pressure as well, that goes the same for them. So, and if you are in doubt, you should definitely go and consult your doctor and ask specifically if this is something that you can do. Also, I always say that you shouldn't do cold water immersions alone. Always go with others. This is also, you can say, a very social thing to do. People in Scandinavia, we have these winter swimming clubs where we meet up and go out and have a swim together because it really bonds people. I think it's both the nature perspective of it, but it's also doing something in a community where everybody is equal. It doesn't really matter who you are or what you do, because we are together on doing this exactly as just a human being. So there's something really just very basic and natural about doing cold and heat exposure. It has been there always. So it's just nature, and it's just our environment and just being as a human being. So the connection that's created around doing this in a community is very strong. And we have had this in Denmark for hundreds of years now. And we still continue on this culture, but we also add the sauna today. So that's a kind of a new tradition for us. But you could say we have these clubs around the sauna and going into the water, back to the sauna, into the water. And it's just a very good way of connecting. And I think it has everything to do with the increase of serotonin in the brain, which is this neurotransmitter for mental balance. But it's also helping us connecting with others. So it increases our social gene, you can say, a social being. So and also our gratitude. So people always say they feel so grateful after doing winter swimming. And I think that has something to do with the serotonin and and dopamine, both giving you energy, but drive, but also this positive mindset afterwards of feeling grateful for the world, feeling grateful for life. And I think that positive mindset, that is how you go into the world, right? That's how you then approach your problems or your worries afterwards. And it seems a little bit less worrying maybe afterwards. That's how we can decrease the stress at least. But if you are healthy, you can do this, I think. But if you're not, then consult your doctor.
Absolutely, that's a great point. And also, what I've been reading in your book, Winter Swimming, it's beautiful to see this tradition, this culture in your part of the world, and people still doing it. And community does have so much power. And I hope that in India also we start building this culture and we have this space where people can come together and do this together. So that will be even more powerful than what cold exposure already is. So that makes a lot of sense, gives us great insight into what are some of the actionables we should do as a community together after listening to this, right? So that was amazing. Thank you for sharing that with us. And another thing that you pointed out about sleep, right? So just to explore it a little bit in this context is that one thing, like you said, that if we are already not getting enough sleep is when we should not really do as much cold exposure, because it could add up on the stress of our body and we might end up not sleeping that well, right? So do you think that here is where heat, sauna and exposing ourselves to heat would help in some way? And how does sleep fit into this cold and heat exposure?
So it might be that cold and heat exposure will help us sleep better. But as for now, I think that we are lacking research on specifically how and what protocol gives you better sleep. But we do know from this is just anecdotal, that people tell us all the time and tell me all the time, all these years doing this research, that they sleep better. What we did see in my research was that that the winter swimmers had a lower core temperature during the night, which really indicates that they have a good sleep. You really want a low core temperature, but you also want that cortisol spike in the morning. And we saw that the winter swimmer had a higher cortisol spike to wake up than the control group, and it was a little bit earlier also. So it could be that this might have some connections to a better sleep. That is definitely showed in research that it has everything to do with the cortisol levels and core temperature, but also how the cortisol levels are increased in the morning. So it might be it has some connection, but we do need more research to say anything more specifically on how it affects sleep, I think.
Understood. That was a great insight, and I hope that we do get research in order to learn more about this. And I'm sure that it still wouldn't hurt us to sort of fit this into our already good enough routine or lifestyle if we are healthy individuals and we don't really have any severe issues. I'm sure that we can still find room to fit this in and experience the results ourselves and sort of be intuitive in the whole process, right? So this makes a lot of sense. And lastly, you do talk about how cold exposure should be different for men and women, right? So what impact does it have, and should women approach cold exposure in a different way?
No, as for now, I think that the men and women do get the same outcome from cold exposure. They do increase their metabolism apparently in the same way. It seems that not in the same way, but they to the same extent. But they do it differently because men have, and I think that's very logic, they are a different size. They have more muscle mass than women, bigger hearts to pump the blood around, which as an outcome shows that women are colder on their hands, colder on their ears, so colder peripherally compared to men. But they have a little bit warmer core temperature than men. And women vary their temperature up to 1 degree over their menstruation cycle during the month. So it really shows that women have a different way of making sure that they create heat and also how they lose heat during the month. So if you look at the metabolic organs that we also have as create the heat is the brown fat and the muscle mass. As we don't have as much muscle mass as men have, it might be the reason why women have more brown fat than men have, because we get easily colder. So we compensate in another way. You can say to keep our core temperature and our vital organs warm enough. But the recommendations of the 11 minutes per week and the 57 minutes in the sauna is what I would call micro stress. So we are still in the very low range of exposure, which would be the same for the men and for the women. But more research is, of course, needed to see if we could do something else for women. But I think as we are in that low range, women can also do this protocol and expose them, because they also defend the cold just in another way. But they increase their metabolism so they can keep their temperature up. But as soon as you shiver, I always say this is individual also. So if you go and do your first cold water immersion, you should definitely feel for yourself what is safe for you. Do you feel this is too overwhelming for your nervous system? Then you should go up. So never compare yourself to others, but do it in company of others. So it's a you can say it's a personal journey doing cold water immersions or cold exposure and heat exposure. You cannot compare with other people because they have another kind of adaptation. They might have that. They have another, you can say, threshold for how much muscle mass they have and how much white and brown fat they have, and how sensitive they also are to the cold. It might be that people also vary in how many cold receptors they have in the skin. So there are many components, which means that you should do your own protocol, you can say. But what my research shows is if you keep it on the 11 minutes and 57 minutes of heat, cold and heat, then you are getting some benefits, and it's definitely not too much. So it might be the sweet spot. 1 to 2 minutes in the cold water should be enough. I hope not that people do 11 minutes in a row, because that's definitely too much. I would expect, yeah.
True. That's a great insight. And how many weeks do you think would an average person need to do this for, in order to sort of benefit from these results that we are getting? So like you are saying, 11 minutes of cold exposure and 57 minutes of heat exposure per week. In how many weeks of doing this can we sort of observe these changes in ourselves?
Oh, I think that's a really great question. So how long should you do it before you can expect any results from this? But I think that you will benefit from already the first time that you go. It's just like when you go and do your exercise in the gym, you will have benefits already 2 minutes after, because as soon as you activate those muscles and you activate that hormetic stress in the cells, you will benefit from it. So see it as something that is beneficial for you already the first time you go, although it might be very painful, because it's going to be a little bit painful when you start out. I'm not going to lie. That's definitely, for me, it was at least. But as soon as you go the first time, you will benefit just like you go to the gym, and that's going to benefit for you. So, yeah, but what we do see is that already after one winter swimming season, that's what we call it, because we have these seasons in Scandinavia. So we know that 3 to 4 months of cold water immersions a couple of times a week is going to increase your insulin sensitivity. And it has also shown that that's going to lower your blood pressure, which is a super good and hardcore measure of how well your cardiometabolic health is. So if you can lower your blood pressure, you have lowered your inflammation in the body, and also you're getting further away for getting heart diseases and cardiovascular diseases. So I think that is a very strong outcome, that if you do this for a couple of months, 3, 4, 5 months, then you we can see in research that this is something that we have seen in people, both with younger people, but also people in their middle age. So it's it's for everyone as long as you are healthy enough.
Amazing. I hope that this really nudges our audience to begin with this, and the people who are already increasing cold exposure to sort of make these little changes and not go on the extremes and find the balance between this. And this protocol is very easy. It's very like easy to do and to remember and to sort of execute, right? So that's a great insight for this. Thank you so much for this. And as we conclude our episode today, do you have any last messages or thoughts to share with us?
Yeah, I mean, I think no, I think I already said that, but I think it's very important that people do this with other people. So don't do this alone. And if you feel very overwhelmed, stressed when you do it, then use your breath to lower that stress level, and use your nose to breathe and your mouth to talk. So when you hyperventilate in the beginning, that's normal, but try and see if you can switch to the nose. So that is all collectively, you can say the stress up to stress down, and using your nose to breathe through the stress is what I call the Thermalist approach.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Dr. Susanna, for being here today. This was a really insightful conversation, and I hope that this is a big nudge for our audience to sort of even find out more for themselves and not just base it on one episode, but to study it, to learn it, and to be more like learn it more from your books as well and from many other episodes. So thank you for being here once again. And Dr. Susanna was kind enough to share an exclusive discount for us, for our audience here. So you can definitely find it for yourself in the description below and get the book and learn more about Dr. Susanna. You'll find the details about her Instagram and her website in the description below. Definitely go reach out and probably learn a lot more from her. Thank you so much, Dr. Susanna, once again for being here. That's it for today's episode. I am Sakshi Pawar, and I'll be your host for the Settle or Be Better podcast. So stay tuned while we bring more inspiring stories here. You know the drill. Subscribe to the Settle or Be Better podcast, like, share, and comment on our videos. And oh, hit the bell icon, because you don't want to miss the mind-boggling health discussions we're about to bring for you. Why settle when you can be better?